Okay, this is part 2, magic words and myth. So, we've got magic. That's to influence things. It's a word for influencing things. Okay? Mythology or myths would be a story. It's a bunch of words put together in a story form. The word myth is actually a Greek, or it's from the Greek word mythos. It would mean story, words, legend. It could be like a proverb. It doesn't have to be true. It doesn't have to be false. It could be historical fiction, or it could be history, like propaganda, which has elements of truth and is yet also a myth. So, are myths for influencing people? Do myths influence attention, perception, and behavior? Just consider that they might. So myths influence perception, attention, and behavior. And what are they made out of? They're a bunch of words strung together. I said I was going to talk about money, and I will, but I'm also going to talk about the word I. I forgot that I was going to talk about that, but I just remembered, and it's important. Magic means something that has an influence on something else. Let's use that really broad definition. A myth would be a story composed of words, which is, of course, a type of magic based on the definition I gave in the prior video, that words are used to influence. So, is the word I a myth, or is it magic? Of course, it's both. Really, even this chart right here is not consistent with what I've just said. I made a mistake. Uh-oh. How can you make mistakes? Well, it's pretty simple. You just do something and then realize that that isn't the best way to do it. Then you call it a mistake, because mistake is just a label, right? So we have magic here, the big category, and then a kind of magic is words, or magic words. Okay? So, words are a particular kind of tool for influencing people. Magic is any influence, any form of influence. Myths basically are just a bunch of words put together. And when you have a bunch of words put together, you almost always have a myth. Maybe not always. You always have a claim. That's the terminology I use. If you have a bunch of words together, that's a claim. Or I'll go with that. A claim. And some claims, if there's like a story format to it, other than, something like the way to compute the force of gravity is blah, 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 blah. If there's a claim, it's probably a myth. Our country is the best country in the world. Our country is getting worse than it used to be. All of those things imply judgments and a variety of presumptions of which would be best and worst and how to tell. And those are all not specified in the short statement. So those all are claims that would be myths, or they could be backed by myths. Maybe people would be more familiar with that use of the term myth. So, what is I? Is I a word? Well, the word I is a word, and we have our myths about who we are, how we're different from other people, how we're alike from other people. We can do that same chart of, okay, well, here's how I am, and here's how I'm like people, and here's how I'm not like people. We could even do, here's how I am, and here's how God is, and how we're similar and how we're different. We could play with that. But I'm going to assert that who you actually are. And what I refers to and what God refers to is magic. The word refers to something that's magic. It isn't constructed in words. What I am, like what I actually am, isn't a story. It's not my history. It's not my past. And anything I would say about my past would be in words. When I even say my past, that's obviously a word, but anything I say about my past, because it's something I'm saying, is a claim, which means it's a myth, and that's not what I am. And that's not what God is either. We can superimpose images or ideals or opinions or interpretations or whatever, but the past and all those claims aren't what I is. I is something that's magic or mysterious, beyond words. I think of God as the source of all magic, the source of all influence, in other words. Everything that happens is God's influence. What does God influence? Well, there's nothing else but God for God to influence, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense to talk about what God influences unless you separate God and I and you and various other characters and personas constructed in language, forming myths, and then have a story about these various players or actors or personas or characters in a magical word thingy called the myth of how it is and how life is going and all that. So it's all just a myth. Now, again, myths are to influence. Myths are not for any other purpose but to influence. So if I can direct someone's behavior with a story or direct someone's attention or their perception with a story, that's fine. That's what myths are for. That's what words are for. That's what magic is for. Now this segment, I don't have as much kind of formally prepared. With the other thing with the Super Bowl and concerts and distinguishing those, I had a plan. I had already worked out what I was going to say before. With this one, money will be our next topic and probably the last topic. Money, what is it? Where does it come from? Well, money is something that is declared into being. It's defined. Okay? Who declares it? A system of organized coercion, like a court system. And they say, okay, you want to pay your taxes. Well, here's the form of payment that we will accept. You owe us a certain amount of taxes, and we will take either a gold coin printed with the face of our king or queen or whatever that is from the royal mint. We'll accept that, or we'll accept your firstborn son or whatever they say. That's what we will accept. So where do taxes come from? Taxes are also declared. Okay, that wasn't supposed to fall. Taxes are declared into being. Who declares taxes into being? Groups of organized coercion. So taxes and money are actually very related. You can't really have what I mean by money like an official. This is the accounting unit for a particular jurisdiction of political influence. You can't have money without taxes. They say, well, here's what you can pay your taxes in. And that's money. Extortion is a word for a particular way of people relating to other people. Racketeering is a way of people relating to other people. Unlicensed extortion is called extortion. Licensed extortion and racketeering is called taxation. Organized coercion is present in any case of licensed extortion or racketeering, which I'm calling taxation. And it doesn't have to be taxes. You could call it tariffs, taxes, tribute, levies, fees, fines. Oh, you crossed the line there, you're going to have to pay a fine. You want to come through our port? Well, there's a fee to do that. We can call it a tax, you know, an excise tax or an import tax or whatever you want it, a sales tax. It really doesn't matter what type of tax. They're all created through declaration. They're just words. And then after these taxes are created, after these systems of organized coercion say, okay, we're going to monopolize and punish any unlicensed organized coercion, any unlicensed taxation, unlicensed extortion, unlicensed racketeering. We're going to punish those. Well, when they do that, that's monopolizing. And they do that using court systems and criminal justice systems and so forth. But they also use myths and propaganda. And what makes gold or silver valuable is when courts say, we'll receive it. That's a big factor, at least. Diamonds are not used as currency anywhere, but there's a huge cartel system to control the supply of diamonds. So diamonds would be the kind of thing that would be chosen for a currency system. And I mention this because many people are not clear about the history of gold and silver and their use as currency. And people think of gold and silver as somehow better or more fair than paper currencies and electronic currencies and so forth. Well, the reason that gold and silver were selected as the substance to be used for coins of the realm for these taxes. So the reason that gold and silver were chosen is because they were so rare. So taxes are declared into being, okay, you owe us 10% or you owe us 50% or whatever. That's just declared. It's just imposed and enforced and then extracted or extorted from the population using organized coercion, meaning military force. And they say, okay, you have to pay us in gold. Why gold? Well, because we have gold and you don't. And you're going to have to buy our gold from us, and we're going to tell you the exchange rate that you're going to buy it from us. Now, why would a system of organized coercion choose gold? Again, because they can control the supply of it, just like the De Beers cartel has successfully controlled the supply of diamonds for the last century or so. And they've also, De Beers has also put out these propaganda and advertising are almost interchangeable terms. De Beers has put out a tremendous amount of propaganda to have people associate diamonds with wealth, with stardom, with fame, with, in particular, marriage and engagement. That was completely created in the last 100 years. The founder of the public relations field, Edward Bernays, who wrote a book called Propaganda in the early 20th century, he was hired by De Beers to do the first product placements in movies, and they would actually write entire storylines around the engagement scene where the handsome leading actor asks the beautiful leading actress to marry him and presents a huge diamond or a small diamond, but a diamond. It has to be a diamond. And of course she says yes, and it's very emotional, and people have that association built as they watch these movies. And back in the early 20th century and into the middle 20th century, movies had such an impact. Not that they don't now, but movies had such an impact. They were really, really big deals, right? So, when groups of organized coercion gathered their armies together, they could take over mines and say, okay, we have these mines, we have all the gold, we'll buy up the other gold that other people have or steal it from them or whatever. They'll control the supply of gold and then force people to trade horses or wheat or labor for, you know, a year of, you have to spend a month as a servant in the palace or whatever. Well, however they do it, they would use these gold coins, and people would circulate these gold coins around, or silver, or whatever it might be, and because the court systems would accept those for payment of taxes, then everybody wanted to have them because everybody was subject to the taxes of within that racketeering network or that political jurisdiction. So that's basically it. We could use more little circles and charts and show, you know, the difference between different things. I'm going to emphasize one of my more kind of controversial items here. We'll go with the mafia or organized crime and government. What do they have in common? Well, they declare debts owed to them, like a government will say, okay, you owe us 10%. You owe us a portion of your sales. Oh, you sold $10,000 this week, you owe us $1,000. Mafia will say, oh, you're operating within our jurisdiction. You sold $10,000 this week. We're watching your store, by the way. You owe us 10% of that. So they have that in common, but governments have myths of legitimacy. I put that in 2 lines because I ran out of room. But they have myths of legitimacy. Mafias don't. So we could say that governments are like more efficient forms of organized crime. They use propaganda. They use their organized coercion to enforce a monopoly with great effectiveness. So they have courts, they have laws, they have licenses. And mafias don't have courts and laws and licenses. They might have similar stuff. Oops, I was supposed to draw that in the area. Okay, so licenses, laws, and courts, those are specific to government. It's a little hard for me to manipulate the page here because the webcam displays backwards or in a mirrored kind of way from what I see. So could the mafia could they have a venue where people sit down and arbitrate and moderate and negotiate similar to courts? Yeah. Could they have rules and codes and say, oh, you broke the rules, here's the punishment? Yeah, they could have that. So you could say that there's some verbal category, some term that we could put here where we would say, well, mafia and government are alike in that way, but they don't call them laws or courts or licenses necessarily, at least not at the point where a system of organized coercion has risen to the point of being considered a legitimate government. They may start as revolutions, mafias, gangs, whatever, but as they get bigger and bigger and bigger, they have these kind of things and legitimacy. Now, I mentioned diamonds. In some countries, whether that's colonial Africa or anywhere else, in some countries you have disputes about who is the legitimate political leader. In fact, pretty much in all countries you have that, but in some countries it's very, very big deal. You have civil wars and tremendous dispute over which government is legitimate. You have multiple governments very distinct from each other, right? Here's the Confederacy and here's the Union. They have a lot in common, but they're quite distinct. They're both governments. They both are claiming authority over the same territory, but they are also quite distinct. They have a lot in common and a lot separate. So in the case of many I use diamonds in Africa somewhat arbitrarily, but in the case of many of those countries or regions,